Now, in June this year, there'll be events, plenty of them, to celebrate 800 years since the issuing of Magna Carta, the great charter of liberties agreed by King John. But 2015 is also the anniversary of another very significant milestone in democratic history here in Britain, the January Parliament, when Simon de Montfort created the first parliament, really, of elected representatives. 750 years ago, it was, in the words of one historian, the House of Commons in embryo. The BBC is marking these events with what we call Democracy Day, a day of coverage focusing on the development and the state, really, of democracy in the UK today. And with me, I'm pleased to say, the former Labour leader, Lord Kinnock, and the Conservative MP for North East Somerset, Jacob Rees Mogg. Thank you both for coming in. Very broad question, first of all, then, Neil, if I may. What is your assessment of the current state and health of British democracy?
In some respects, it's very healthy in its diversity and in the passion of quite a large number of young people. In other respects, it's unhealthy because of the disengagement of large proportions of the population, which tragically and dangerously can result in very low turnouts, not just at by-elections and local elections, but at parliamentary elections. And I welcome the initiatives taken by the BBC, for instance. I just wish they were continual, even little 5-minute shots right throughout every year, maybe twice a week, rather than simply having to wait for a great anniversary, like the de Montfort anniversary, and then piling it into the public. I think we need to provide, by the means of public broadcasting, a continual system of factual education so that people cherish, safeguard, and are active in their democracy to a greater extent than they are now.
Is that, I mean, that's a duty for broadcasters, Jacob. Is there a duty to politicians to engage in a more efficient way?
Well, I think it is the politicians who need to up their game. I think it's very interesting the Scottish referendum got a huge turnout. When people are excited by an issue, when they think it's important, they turn out in large numbers. When they think however they vote it won't make very much difference, that's when you get low turnout. So it's for us as politicians to explain what we're trying to do very clearly and to set out the differences.
Even at a general election, I remember one where I think the turnout was under 60% in the last decade. I mean, that surely is a time when people realise there is something at stake.
That's right. 2001, I think, was the lowest recent turnout. It'll be very interesting at this election because of the fragmentation of politics. Neither main party in the latest poll above 30%. The Greens, UKIP, are doing surprisingly well. And that's going to change the House of Commons if that is replicated in seats won by minor parties, and indeed will raise questions as to the mandate that a winning party has.
A House of Commons that reflects that kind of variety, Neil, surely is a healthy thing.
It could be, but it could also lead to a kind of stasis, which would also reflect badly not only on our democracy, but on the need for Parliament to take action that is effective on behalf of the great majority of people. So if we were to get a greater diversity in the House of Commons, and of course there are a large number of parties there already, but if we were to get a greater diversity, that would be fine if it was faithfully reflecting the diversity of attitudes, as long as it didn't inhibit the abilities of governments effectively to govern. And there's always a danger of that. But of course you can't roll the dice on that, especially in a first-past-the-post system like we have. I think we're in the last 20 years of that system. I think we will get a form of constituency-based proportional representation, which might engender greater attention, involvement, excitement, to use Jacob's word.
A point for you both on the principle that we've kind of established over the last 5 years. Some people are saying, well, you know, whatever the tensions in the coalition that we've had, at least it's shown that parties can cooperate, they can come together and form a government, it can be stable. So, you know, having a variety within the House is not necessarily unstable.
Yeah, but here's a paradox. Citizens in general, some of them affiliated strongly to parties, but citizens in general, in any case, want simultaneously the calm, the decorum, the stability of politicians who don't argue with each other a hell of a lot and can do deals and work things out in cooperation with each other, but at the same time, come back to it, they want the excitement, the clash, the real divergence of opinions, which in their view gives them real choice. Now, I tend to be of the latter school, as you may recall from my history. But the difficulty is in getting politicians to be able to demonstrate that they can be cooperative and very mature, very grown-up, very rational in the national interest without sacrificing or compromising their fundamental ideals which made them want to engage full-time in political representation in the first place. If we can crack that, then our democracy will be very healthy. If we don't, it's going to go through a sluggish period.
What is the coalition experiment? What's it taught us?
The coalition came about in a crisis. The country was facing an economic meltdown in 2010. It was the first weekend of the Greek financial crisis, something that's recurring now. And that led to a broad and generous deal between the two parties, where both party leaders, to their credit, put the national interest ahead of their party interest. Over the last 5 years, that's frayed a good deal, and the relationship's nothing like as good as it was, and collective responsibility to a large extent has broken down. So I'm quite keen, along with Lord Kinnock, to go back to red in tooth and claw party clashes, because I think it's the clash of ideas that produces the best form of government. The adversarial system, as in our courts, works very well in political debate.
Well, we can start with the clash now, because I basically disagree with Jacob's representation of where we were in the early summer of 2010. And there was a degree of distortion taking place then, which has continued, unfortunately, to the disadvantage of our country. And I'm not talking about which party's in government. I'm talking about the narrative of where we really were in 2010, in difficulty, but certainly not in meltdown.
I wasn't, though I'm happy to, blaming the Labour government for that crisis. I was actually blaming the Eurozone at that point, though I think our crisis did have a lot to do with the Labour government.
When you talk about a lack of engagement, both of you in different ways, and you see people reaching out for other alternatives, I mean, UKIP is clearly one, the Greens to some extent as well, and other parties too, the SNP doing strongly in Scotland. What does that tell us about the relative performance of what we used to call the big parties, Conservative, Labour and the Lib Dems to some extent? What does it tell us about people's perceptions of how those parties have handled themselves in government?
Well, the difficulty there is you're back to this paradox, this dilemma, that if parties, which are in any case coalitions, Jacob's party is, my party is, always has been, and that's healthy about it, it'd be stupid if it was a drab, uniform, regimented system. Nobody would want that. But here's the dilemma. In each of the big parties, we'll continue to call them that, there will be people whose sentiments are more restrictive or introverted, so far, for instance, as Europe is concerned, and those who understand the global reality in which we live and want to multiply the strength of Britain by being part of an effective European Union. In the interests of avoiding the description, the awful description of split, both of these major coalitions cohere around a general idea of what their attitude is to Europe and everything follow from it, which provides a ready opportunity for a populist party to come along and say, a plague on all your houses, what we need is a clean out, and that means leaving the European Union. Now, it's not a realistic prospect, but it does impose a duty on politicians to explain all the time exactly what they're trying to do, to try and safeguard against the easy throwaway idea of a party that's got all the answers, which in fact has none. That's got to be safeguarded against at all times.
Okay. Though I can bore on Europe with the best of them, I'm not going to blame Europe on this occasion. I think it's something different. I think that parties recognised that to win elections they needed to focus on a small number of votes in a small number of seats, and that disconnected them from safe seats in either direction. So the Conservatives do very little in safe Labour seats, Labour nothing in safe Conservative seats. But we all also take for granted our own safe seats. So we have become remote as political parties from our base supporters, and we're not engaging with those who won't necessarily vote for us. In 1964, the Conservatives got 40% of the vote in the northeast of England. If we got that this time in the country, we would be dancing a jig. And it's that failure, it's the sensible approach for an individual election that I think has been very damaging to the body politic election after an election, and we need to reverse that.
The clock has beaten us, but very interesting to talk to you both, and hopefully it'll be seen as a very interesting contribution to the debate today on Democracy Day. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.